If you consider yourself a Final Fantasy fan, you're most likely at least well aware of Crisis Core's stellar reputation, one that I believe basically everything about the game earns. It has great production value, it's a game that was unbelievable as a PSP exclusive, and one of the greatest stories in gaming. And it had innovations to the melding of action game and RPG combat that would go on to become the standard in these games moving forward. And hey, don't worry guys, I don't plan on going into full spoilers in this video, although to a light degree they will be unavoidable. But here I want to talk about what I believe to be the understated backbone of not only Crisis Core's story, but how this odd and rarely discussed side quest does some very heavy lifting for both the world building of Crisis Core and the FF7 universe as a whole. I sure hope it's not a spoiler to you, given its omnipresence literally everywhere, even in Smash Bros., but Sephiroth is Final Fantasy VII's villain. There are very sparse references throughout the original game that he was at one point effectively the hero of Midgar, but an event would happen, he turned evil, and then FF7 happens. Lovingly recreating the scenes of Sephiroth's past as a hero was one of the main jobs of Crisis Core, but Crisis Core also has a new game-specific villain who could honestly get his own video too to set up. So in actuality, Sephiroth's hero days are a bit Golden Age Griffith-esque, where he always seems just out of our main character's reach. He's a little bit too legendary a hero to aspire to even be in the same room as, and they don't meet much across Crisis Core's runtime before Sephiroth would turn heel, and so much of the heavy lifting in this game comes from the side content. And indeed, this game is actually mostly side quest. It's a bit like if you mix Monster Hunter with an action RPG, something that the PSP and Vita would thrive doing often, with both consoles' best releases largely being these action-focused games with missions designed to take anywhere between 10 and 45 minute long chunks to complete. And since the missions in this game are so disparate and strewn across this game's world, our story is largely delivered by the game's various hubs, with some NPCs and side quests really expounding on what were either minor or non-existent plot threads from the original game, with this side quest, Sephiroth's fan club, being part of the latter category. You can first encounter this quite early in the game, by chapter 2 even, and there's 3 other fan clubs in this game too, 2 of which you can join here as early as this, but notably, this early in the game, Sephiroth's fan club is barred from you. The Silver Elite is just that, elite and exclusive and only for VIPs. Not only does this mirror the gap in the strength between our MCs and Sephiroth, which was shown so cleverly in the original game with Sephiroth hitting nasty 3000 damage attacks effortlessly in the game's major flashback, but this also shows that Sephiroth is beloved by the public on another league to the rest of Midgar's heroes. There's enough demand to be a Sephiroth fan to create exclusivity just to get on a mailing list, and that is, I think, a shockingly ingenious addition to the FF7 mythos. And I think this stands out even though you only ever actually receive 3 pieces of Sephiroth related mail, and one is fluff, one is conjecture, and one out and out sounds like it's either not true or a misconstruction of one of the game's most important cutscenes. But herein lies a subtle genius of the fan clubs. It still leaves so much room for Sephiroth to still be this distant, unknowable and unavailable figure as he was throughout FF7, and you get much more mail about the other fan clubs, and yet they are also much easier to join. Nobody's pining to join Genesis's fan clubs, yes, he has 2 of them, because they are freely available to all. And yet for Sephiroth you must succeed on a quiz of Sephiroth trivia in order to join, and this is only after chapters and chapters in game where months are passing in the storyline. You see the club shun and look down on its outsiders, and yet hungrily fervour for pointless and meaningless information about Sephiroth. It's an interesting way to portray celebrity in a world that only really here has any kind of internet mentioned. But that is exactly what's being shown here, celebrity. Sephiroth is not just a distant, legendary and almost mythical hero, but he's a target for gossip rags and quickies. And it's interesting how this addition to the world's lore helps to both demystify but yet further mythologize Sephiroth. In the original game, it's entirely possible that only people who work for Shinra, or people that are either enthusiasts or directly affected by his actions, would have any idea who Sephiroth even is. But this reopens the world and imagines a Midgar where surely everyone, at least everyone topside, would know who Sephiroth is and cheer for him. He's gone from a legendary soldier to a legend, an e-boy, and a heartthrob, and I think this expounds on his character and place in the world drastically. And now, don't get me wrong, I love Final Fantasy VII in all of its forms, but while Sephiroth is an incredibly iconic villain, examining just the original game, he seems markedly absentee. After the first act, we spend hours and hours chasing after Sephiroth long after he's turned heel, literally hunting him down across the globe. But for the most part, this Sephiroth is a megalomaniac. He's essentially already mind-broken by plot revelations, and he's fully evil throughout the runtime of the whole game. We see just a single good act of his, and then hundreds of evil ones. But in Crisis Core, across his limited screen time, he's a mentor, a friend, and most notably, a hero. And while we see a limited amount of these things happen, there's a hungry cabal of pedestrians desperate for any and all little info drops and sightings of Sephiroth anywhere he might be deployed by Shinra across the globe. And it's a nice reflection on the idea that Sephiroth's coolness, derived from both his effortless efficacy and his cool hair, would make him number one of nigh everyone worldwide if it were put to good use, and indeed at some point it was. And I think that's why replaying Crisis Core after its re-release, that this side quest in particular really caught my eye this time around. And indeed, if you see it through to its conclusion, as annoying and obscure as it may be, there's an argument to be had that this actually knits out the emotional core of the game. It delineates basically everything about the four main characters of this entry, and it informs much of your interpretations of these characters. Indeed, for Genesis, the lore contained within these emails is pivotal to understanding his character. Meanwhile for Sephiroth, it's frivolous and shallow, but it allows Sephiroth to still remain this distant and hard to reach character, while still being the most sought after and most beloved of the Soldier First class. In spilling nothing new about the character, we learn so much more about Sephiroth's history and place in the world than we might have learned if in fact the emails were just lore dumps and we had interviews with Sephiroth's dad. I think this does a good job at enhancing the tragic angle of Sephiroth's character. For a time, he was Gaia's hero, like the Son Goku of this universe, and his participation throughout this game's tragedy only enhances that aspect of his character. But I've promised to avoid spoilers in this video. The point still stands though that this expansion on the lore of FF7 does a lot for his character. He previously felt a bit more like Shinra's secret weapon. When some extreme situation would come up, Shinra might unleash the hounds and sick Sephiroth on it, but here it's treated as an event. We get further expounding on this if you talk to the grunts that join you on missions or at Shinra headquarters, but all that is more so in the bounds of what we already knew within the original game. So I think it's the combination and relationship between all of these elements of world building that winds up bringing the fan club to the forefront. Since I've spent so long here going over the existence of the fan clubs rather than the substance of them, I'd like to read to you the second email you get from the Sephiroth fan club. Pretty eye-opening, fun, and yet quite understated too. It goes, Sephiroth is known to value his private life, but there was a time when he had two best friends. We'd like to share a story of this threesome guaranteed to raise a smile. The soldier trio would use the training room exclusively as their playground, but in order to retain their first class dignity, they would sneak in only after the second class members had gone home. Then they would proceed to have one of the three stand with a dumb apple on his head, while the other two would throw their swords at the apple to pierce it. Sephiroth always won, his Masamune always striking every dumb apple dead center. Here we get some tidbits of information. Confirmation that Genesis and Angeal are indeed best friends with Sephiroth's and not just colleagues, and an idea that the sparring they do in the cutscene beneath this video isn't like forced training for their job, but is instead friendly competition to see which of them is the best. A bit scary that throwing meteors at each other is friendly to these guys, but hey, more allusions to just how mythic Soldier First Class is, and I think it enhances things a lot that they're doing this by sneaking in when the other staff isn't present. It's very brotherly, and it shows a camaraderie we don't really get to see from Sephiroth elsewhere throughout the games. Even when he interacts with them in the story, there's a constant lone wolf air around Sephiroth, even if he clearly does care about them. The final part of this though I find dubious. As much as I like the idea of Angeal launching a buster sword through an apple on Sephiroth's head, I feel like that's kind of pointless and silly for the trio, and that's why I think this might just be a rumour of what it is they actually get up to in the training room. Although, for the record, it probably is true that Sephiroth always won, and if you're wondering what a dumb apple is, play the game! FF7R2 isn't going anywhere guys, and you have plenty time to experience some of gaming history before the 7 Remake franchise spoils the game for you. So you can go out there and give it a shot before you wind up not really sure if you should play it or not. I just love how simple, silly, and yet effective this whole piece of storytelling winds up being. It delivers so much info in one of the goofiest side quests of the whole franchise. There's even some deeper hints at things like Professor Hojo's character here too, with it heavily implied that he's the chairman of the Silver Elite. With FF7R2 just around the corner and FF7R1 going as far as to make canon things from such obscure lore as Dirge of Cerberus' Japan-only co-op multiplayer mode, I hope that this little slice of life in Midgar isn't forgotten and it makes a reappearance somewhere across the further intertwining stories of Cloud, Zack, and Sephiroth. Maybe Cloud will even get his own fan club too, or you know, at least a house full of fans. And that's it for this niche video on an even nicher piece of Final Fantasy lore. If you're unfamiliar with my work, I mostly teach people fighting games, but lately I've been stretching my legs more into video essays and RPG related content. So you know, if you're the type of person who likes learning more about games and how they form meaningful experiences, I'd love if you subscribed or left a like on the video. It helps get my channel in the eyes of more people and lets me take on more ambitious projects down the line, just like supporting me on my supporter pages or joining my YouTube membership, where you could get a shout out just like my favourite fan archetype. That's going to be all for this video, but as always I'm going to leave you all by saying, stay safe.